We've got participants still coming in, but welcome to people as they are entering the room. And we're so pleased to be partnering with the Agassiz Regional Library on this Moving Words Writers Across Minnesota event, featuring the talents of Shannon Gibney, Sarah Stonich, and Wendy Webb. I'm Wendy Worden, Programs and Services Coordinator at the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, which is the Library of Congress designated Minnesota Center for the Book. As we get started this evening, we would like to acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land from which I'm broadcasting tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. I also want to acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. The Friends has coordinated the year-long Minnesota Book Awards program for 14 years, and as Minnesota's Center for the Book, we produce programming that benefits all ages and reaches all corners of the state. We are grateful for the generosity of each writer who chooses to share their personal stories, and we respect what they choose to share. We also appreciate our audience's desire to learn from writers and their experiences. This series is made possible in part by the state of Minnesota through a grant to the Minnesota Department of Education, and additional support is provided by the Harlan Boss Foundation for the Arts and Education Minnesota. To start things off, we'll have a brief reading and presentation and/or from each author. And following that, we'll have questions from our audience and more freewheeling chat between the writers. So we're really excited to get started on this with our first writer this evening, Wendy Webb. And I've just lost Wendy's bio as I'm scrolling through things here. So Wendy is the best-selling and award-winning author of 6 novels of Gothic suspense, which she will expound upon. The Tale of Halcyon Crane won the Minnesota Book Award in 2011. The End of Temperance Dare won the Minnesota Book Award in 2018, and her latest novel is The Keepers of Metzenval. Wendy, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming. I'm Wendy Webb. I am the author of 7 novels of Gothic suspense. I have to update my bio. And the 8th is in the hopper, as they say. It's gone through editing now and is kind of going into the copy editing stage. So that'll be out in the fall of next year. So I write novels, and they call them Gothic suspense. And what that really means to me is a big old house that may or may not have some spirits disgruntled floating around. But that's not the point of my stories. My thoughts sort of revolve around family mysteries that bubble to the surface at inconvenient times. And I just kind of like to get in there and see what happens. I usually start with a place, and then I just kind of go. I kind of think about the characters, daydream a little bit about the characters, but I'm not one who outlines my stories. I just like to have them unfold for me as a writer, as they sort of unfold for you as readers. It makes it fun for me. And I learned that lesson because once I tried to outline a novel and I started writing it and it was terrible. But then I kind of got away from that, and I had something in my head that I wanted to have as like the big reveal, the big surprise in the book. And so I was thinking about that the whole time I was writing it, and I put it in there, and I thought, oh, people are going to just die when they read this. They're just going to be so surprised. And so many readers have told me, oh yeah, we saw that coming a mile away. So I have learned that it's not good for me to know what's coming. I just feel like if I know what's coming, you're going to know what's coming. It's going to be no fun for any of us. So the other thing you should know about my books is I set them on the Great Lakes. And that's sort of a departure for the Gothic genre. You've all heard about Southern Gothics or Gothics that are set kind of on the windswept moors of England. But I live here, and I wanted to write about the places that I knew and the people that I knew. So I set my books on the Great Lakes, and somebody several books ago, a reviewer started calling me the Queen of the Northern Gothic. And hey, Queen of anything, I'll take it. I will take, and I try to get my friends to call me that. I try to get my fiance to call me, they will not call me that. But readers have called me that, and I really like it. I didn't understand that I was inventing a genre that nobody had done before. I just wrote stories set in the places that I knew. I'll tell you a little bit about my current novel, Show and Tell, The Keepers of Metzenvalo. Metzenvalo is a Finnish word meaning forest light. And that gives you a little bit of a clue on what this novel is about. I started writing this very early on during the pandemic. So I had a lot of time alone to think. And my mom floated into my mind, as she often does. She passed away a few years ago from cancer. And I started thinking about her heritage. She was the daughter of Finnish immigrants. And I don't know, I started thinking about the folklore of that area. I had never really delved into it before. So I did a little research, which is uncharacteristic of me. People who know me know I just kind of like to make things up, but I did research this, and I found some pretty incredible things. And one is that when J.R.R. Tolkien was writing Lord of the Rings, he used an epic Finnish poem called Kalevala as his source material, and he even learned Finn to read it in the original language, which if you've ever heard Finnish or have ever seen any words, you know that's quite the feat. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Tolkien. So I started looking into it myself, and it talks about little fairies, for lack of an English term. The Finns call them väki. And they're the same types of little creatures that you see in Irish folklore or English or Scottish folklore. Even Native American folklore has little spirits that kind of control nature. But what the Finns did way back in the day was convince the Vikings that they controlled these creatures. So they were like Gandalf. And again, I've been trying to get people to call me Gandalf. They won't, though. So they had the Vikings convinced that they could control the weather and nature, and they would sink their ships if they dared to try to come. And so they gave Finland a wide berth and didn't invade. In fact, they kind of worked together a little bit. The Finns were boat builders. And so whether it was true or not, they were storytellers, and they convinced the Vikings to leave them alone. And so I started thinking to myself, well, what if that was real? And, you know, sure, a long time has passed, but would the väki go away? No. So what would that look like in real life? And so I started with that notion, and the story is a little bit of a folktale set in modern times about what happens when the grand matriarch of a family dies, and let's just say certain responsibilities pass on to a granddaughter. And it gets a little dark, I will say, but it's a lot of fun too. There's some characters that I loved and I want to revisit in another book. And that's another thing I can tell you about my work. I've set most of my novels in a little town that I call Wharton. It's on Lake Superior, and fooling no one, it's Bayfield. It's Bayfield, Wisconsin. You know, it's pretty obvious, but I've kind of taken it as my own. And so it started with the end of Temperance Dare and has gone on. And the characters in one, the main characters in one, will kind of migrate through other novels, because it's a small town. You'd run into people in the coffee shop. You'd know the people who were the main characters in stories told before. So that's been a fun thing to do. And this novel is set there. And we see and hear from familiar characters. There's one that sort of bubbled to the surface in The Daughters of the Lake, an innkeeper named Simon, who that's like the favorite character of all my readers and even my editors. And when I told my editors that I was setting another book there, they said, "Is Simon going to be in it? Please put Simon in it." And Simon is based on a good friend of mine who is very happy that his character is very well received. So with that, I can stop babbling and and give the floor to somebody else.
Thanks for the babbling, though. It's good. I like hearing about Great Lakes Gothic. I do think this region lends itself to the dark and mysterious, and
Very much so. Lake Superior, absolutely.
Yeah. So, second up to chat with us about their work this evening is Sarah Stonich. Sarah has been awarded a number of grants, including a Minnesota State Arts Board Fellowship and a Loft McKnight Fellowship. Her first novel, These Granite Islands, was translated into 8 languages and was shortlisted for a French award, which I am not going to try to pronounce. I would much rather be trying Finnish than French. And The Laurentian Divide won the Minnesota Book Award in 2019, and her latest title, Reeling, was released this last fall. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had 2 COVID book releases, which has been a really interesting time to be publishing. And I know you'll all have something to say about that too. But yeah, so Reeling just came out, and this is what it looks like. And before that, the title that came out in March of 2020, which was a great time to release a book as well, was Fishing. And after the 2016 election, and actually before that, I started thinking about younger women and the sorts of books that were being kind of peddled towards them, kind of fluff with cartoon covers with shopping bags and high-heeled shoes and champagne flutes. And I didn't see a whole lot of substance out there aimed at women under 40. And it was a demographic that, we are watching, and Wendy and I are older than you two, but, watching these young women have the rug sort of pulled out from under them in a lot of areas. And I wanted to write something that addressed some of these issues, yet, in an entertaining way. So these books are actually considered like comedies. And hopefully they do have these issues wrapped in entertainment. So that was kind of my goal with it. And I think, it seems to be going okay. So I have a character who comes from the very misogynistic world of the male pro sport fishing, and she's had it, and the election is coming up, so she just ditches everything and buys a brownstone in North Minneapolis and gets a job as a consultant for the first all-women's fishing talk show on public television. And she and her rather intrepid assistant, the show is a disaster. But she and her assistant kind of figure out a way to make it succeed by having real interesting women on, and not just sort of these B-list celebrities that they had in mind. And so they start talking to real women and talking about real issues. And so the first title was just getting the show going, and the women that they went out and found. And most of the women in that one were, I made them, most of the characters, the guests on the show, I made them up. But as I started researching fantastic women, I started finding women that I would really want to interview and talk to and portray, women who are doing amazing work, and hard work, you know, all the heavy lifting that needs to be doing. And the show, you know, it becomes kind of a success. So then they have the money to send the show on the road. And that's when I did Reeling. And that one takes place in New Zealand. And it was really fun. I have family there, and this was pre-COVID. So I had been able to go and stay there and do some research. And I was at the Michael King Writers Center in Auckland. And so I got to go out fishing with, you know, real New Zealanders and meet amazing women. You know, the grandniece of a suffragette, a woman who ties fishing flies for like dignitaries and royalty, but yet she herself doesn't fish and she's a recluse. Another woman who's an anti-fashion fashion designer. And so taking some of these issues like, you know, factory clothing production and, you know, just the amount of waste in the clothing industry, and doing the research for stuff like that is really an eye-opener. So that was really interesting for me. And it was fun to be able to set it somewhere else, because almost all of my books are set in Minnesota. I have one, The Ice Chorus is set in Ireland. But I sometimes I like to get out, you know, get out and see the rest of the world a little bit. And I have my other series, and I'm working on the third in the series right now, and it's called Leaping or Landing. I'm not sure yet, but that one takes place in the pandemic. And so it's the claustrophobia, in like the smallness, and how people have to like make do, as we all have been doing, right? So like making things work on these, you know, really challenging circumstances. So she's fishing with women, you know, they're wearing masks and they're in ice houses, ice shacks, which you couldn't get much more claustrophobic, right? Plus it's winter. And so I'm doing that right now. Going out and fishing with women. And it's been cold. I'll say that. It's been really cold. So that's what, you know, that's my feminist chick lit series, for lack of a better term. I mean, that's what my previous agent was calling it. And then I have my Northern series, which began with Vacation Land. And like Wendy, you know, I really draw from Minnesota, especially northern Minnesota, where my family is from. And we have to get together and talk about the Finns, because I'm working on the third in that series, and it's all about a guy who goes to Finland. And the first was Vacation Land, and then the second was Laurentian Divide, which was the one that I won the book award for. And the third is called Watershed. And I was supposed to have gone to Finland to start doing my research. Well, of course, that didn't happen. So I've been like doing a trip to Finland online. So I hop online and I turn into this thing called Radio Garden, where you can listen to any radio station in the world, just have a little arrow. And so I listen to the Finnish stations and the cadences, and I know very little Finnish, but I'm just now getting to the point where I can understand if a radio station is doing like a sporting event, or if it's like a Jesus station, or it's really interesting. So in trying to take this trip to Finland and not actually be there, we also have the magic of the internet, where I can get on Google Maps and like drive the streets of Helsinki, and then drive this incredibly monotonous road that goes from the south of Finland all the way to Lapland. And actually, like, because Google Photos is so great, you can like turn and see gas stations. Like, okay, I'm gonna have my character stop at that gas station, you know. So that's some of the challenges of COVID, I think, have really changed the way that I've been writing. And I want to ask you two guys about that too, how things have changed for you. And also for me, you know, priorities have changed as well. I'm not writing the same sorts of things that I was writing before. I think trying to just get down to the nuts and bolts seems more important to me. Talking about the things that are the most important. And, you know, I don't think many of us writers or artists, I live in an artist community. Some of us have been really productive during this time. Others, myself included, have been a little bit paralyzed by it. So, I mean, there might be a day where all I do is take care of the dog, and just give myself permission to do that and not beat myself up about not writing. Because I think we're still really processing a lot of these changes in the last 2 years, heck, for the last 5 years, which have been big challenges for quite a lot of people. So I guess, you know, my work has changed, and I'm more involved in what I guess I would call a kind of a novel activism, and trying to talk about more important things than, you know, maybe just what I think would be a good, you know, entertaining book to read. I want to slip in some of the things that have a lot of meaning for me. And I know it's been really hard for a lot of people, even just to sit down and read. I know it is for me. I've had a hell of a time trying to read books. And I'm assuming that other people may or may not be having that problem. I know writers who are just like going gangbusters and just writing and writing and writing, and they're like, oh, whatever. But that, I mean, that's what I am right now. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear what you guys are up to and how it's working for you. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I enjoy the thought of feminist chick lit. I like the fishing thing. I was in northern Minnesota camping last autumn, and went into a resort area just to use a bathroom and to get a sandwich. And the restrooms were marked spawners and spermers. And I was just like, this is horrifying. I don't know that I want to buy a sandwich here. But it was a really good sandwich. So I'm really glad I did anyway. But needless to say, I will not be visiting this resort again, because that was just really stunning to me.
And I'm writing that down. And can I use it?
Please do. I'll feel real good about that.
Spawners and spermers.
Yep.
Fantastic.
There you are. So I know I've contributed. I'm going to ask that Shannon join us now. Shannon Gibney is a writer and an educator and an activist a bush artist and McKnight Writing Fellow, and her young adult novels, Dream Country and See No Color, are both Minnesota Book Award winners. She is the co-editor of the anthology, What God is Honored Here, writings on miscarriage and infant loss by and for Native women and women of color. And Shannon teaches critical and creative writing, journalism, and she's just an excellent speaker, like these other ladies. So welcome, Shannon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really fascinating evening so far. Just the opportunity to hear people's processes and kind of where they're at with their work, and also just psychologically and otherwise at this very interesting moment that it is to be alive here. So I'm going to do a little something different, which I'm going to read a new short story. It's a first draft. I'm working on a bunch of different book projects, and so this is what I'm doing with Nicole Chung. It is an anthology tentatively titled Adoptee to Adoptee. It's a collection of short stories by adoptees about teenage adoptees. So it's a YA collection. Harper team will be bringing it out next year. So I we'll see how far I get. So I'm just going to jump into it. It's called Oreo. Louisa Halstead knew that she wasn't Black enough, but she wasn't going to let that stop her from trying. She joined the Black Student Union, tried to broker her math skills into a treasurer position, lost her bid, and settled for parliamentarian, the whitest position on the slate, according to her peers, and the most futile, according to her. No one followed Robert's rule of order during meetings, and she couldn't blame them. Who the hell is Robert, and why is he telling us how to speak, when to speak, and for what purpose? Janissa Keller said at their last meeting, and Louis had laughed while nodding. Everyone talked over each other, and there were tons of side conversations going on at each meeting, while a little bit of work got done. They petitioned the library for more books by Black authors, and got them. They planned their annual Black History Month banquet, which featured dried chicken and endless speeches by Black elders in ill-fitting suits and gowns, who urged them all to stay in school, not to fight, graduate, and attend an HBCU. This year, they had successfully organized to hire a fly DJ for a banquet after party, which everyone was excited about. But Louie, with her curly blonde hair and green eyes, her yellow skin and tiny body, stuck out in all the wrong ways. Her hair would not be tamed into a cute bob like all the other Black girls were wearing. Afro, Lance Palmer and his crew would call her in the halls, and now also at the dance. Why are you trying to play like you down when you ain't? And she wanted to melt into the wall, although the wall wouldn't take her either. She locked herself in the bathroom late at night, practicing Black English, which she had realized all too late was a key marker of Blackness, something she had never had access to in her white household. "I'ma slack the Black off of you," she would say softly into the mirror. This was something she had seen in a movie, but had never heard an actual real-life Black person say. "We about to light up this motherfucker," she said out of the side of her mouth. She had noticed that swear words sounded different, even more powerful to her ears in Black English. "She don't know shit," she said next. And then a side eye and a disdainful frown for the imaginary white girl on the other side of the mirror. "Yeah, thanks, Katie. You a real G, ain't you?" Then she would shake her head and laugh at how ridiculous she sounded, the longing to hear herself in the language so strong. Since Louie loved reading anyway, she turned to literature. While her peers jostled and flirted and ran into each other in the halls between classes and lunch, she would be propped up against a wall reading The Underground Railroad, Ursula, or Killing the Black Body. On the bus too, she propped her knees up and into the seat in front of her, her head below it, hiding in a book. Reading Baldwin and Hurston, she had the feeling of conversing with an old friend who knew she was Black and didn't need any performance or proof of belonging. She had just read another provocative line in Black Skin, White Mask when Nia Edwards sat down beside her. Louie was so surprised that she dropped the book on the floor. "What is it with this tragic mulatto situation anyhow?" Nia said dramatically. Her butt was only halfway on the seat because Louie was in the middle, taking up most of the space. Nia pushed her left hip into Louis'. Are you really just gonna hide behind books for your whole high school career? Louis pushed herself up and moved toward the window so that Nia could get herself on the seat properly. She gazed at Nia's long straightened hair and her finely manicured nails. With her almond brown skin, luminous eyes, and don't give a shit attitude, she was seen as one of the cool Black girls at school, even though she seemed to be a loner. In fact, Louis couldn't remember a single time she had seen Nia with a friend. What are you doing here? Louis stammered. She heard how stupid the words sounded as soon as she spoke them and flushed red. Nia laughed. What do you mean? I ride this bus every day, same as you. She slung her bag off her shoulder and placed it on the floor between her legs. It's a free country, she said, eyeing Louis up and down. At least that's what I hear. Louis felt herself blushing again. What in the world did Nia Edwards want to do with her? Like 2/3 of the bus was empty. She had plenty of places she could sit. Plenty better than beside the weird mixed wannabe girl. The bus driver revved up. The bus engine revved up and the driver shut the doors. They were about to leave. Nia looked straight ahead and Louis could think of nothing to say, so she leaned her head against the window and opened her book again. The bus pulled out. Nia glanced over. Why are you reading that anyway, she asked. Louis snorted before she could stop herself. This? She asked, pointing to Black Skin, White Mass. It's a classic. Her nerd cred, basically synonymous with whiteness in the eyes of the Black kids, would rise astronomically after this conversation. But she didn't care. Fanon had captivated her imagination with this treatise on the colonization of the Black mind. Now it was Nia's turn to snort. What it is boring. Louis gasped. She had never wanted to fight someone before this moment. How could anyone even suggest that Fanon was anything less than breathtakingly brilliant? The bus turned left on Grant. Just a few more stops and they would be at Everest and 19th. Louis stopped. Nia laughed. Whoa, I guess the tragic mulatto ain't so tragic after all, she said. She eyed Louis playfully, sharing her unpopular thoughts on literature and everything, speaking up for herself. Louis could not decide if she was the source of the joke or sharing one with Nia. Tragic mulatto, she asked. Nia sighed. Yeah, you know the trope. Mixed Black girl who doesn't fit in with the white kids or the Black ones. Doomed to live in the in-between space forever, never to find her people. She said the last line melodramatically with her hand to her forehead. This broke the tension and both girls laughed. No, I never heard of that, said Louis. She would look it up tonight. Nella Larson, Passing? The autobiography of an ex-colored band, Nia asked. Louis shook her head. Nia frowned and looked straight ahead. And then it felt awkward again. Clearly, you're reading the wrong book, she said. Louis' brow furrowed. She was far more used to the coarse hallway insults about her hair or her flat butt than being upbraided about her reading habits. It was the most interesting conversation she'd had in months, but she wasn't exactly sure if she was enjoying it. Without warning, Nia leaned over and whispered in Louis' ear. Yo, check this out. She beckoned toward her bag on the floor, a wide and open smile plastered across her face. Louis leaned over, eyebrows raised. Nia bent down and brought out a thick, dog-eared paperback copy of Anna Karenina. You want to read some real literature? The Russians are where it's at. Louis had to admit she was impressed. Clearly, there was a lot more to Nia than met the eye. Finished notes on the Underground last week, Nia said. That ship was dope as hell. Never read anything like it. The bus pulled up to the corner. Louis looked out the window. They were at her stop. She'd been so busy talking with Nia that she hadn't even noticed how close they were. She frantically grabbed at her backpack, unzipped the zipper, and stuffed her book inside. Then she zipped it back up, rose, and smiled half-heartedly at Nia. Hurry up, Oria, we ain't got all day, someone yelled from the back of the bus. Louis' face burned, and she pushed past Nia out into the aisle. You can go ahead and fuck all the way off, Nia shouted back. Dumb bitch, someone shouted back to her. Language, the bus driver shouted. Nia sighed. It's so tiresome being surrounded by cretins, she said just loud enough for Louis to hear. No one said anything else as she made her way out of the bus. When she heard the door shut and the brakes shudder behind her, she allowed herself to smile. And so then this is the next section. You can't begin a paper with a thesis statement, Nia said firmly, scrolling through Louis' paper on the roundhouse on her iPad. It was 2 months later, and the girls were sitting on the 3rd floor of St. Clair High School, waiting for American Lit to start. Louis harumphed. Oh, hooey, she said, you can do anything you want if you do it well. Nia gave her the black girl side eye and frowned. Hooey. That's some kind of white folks slang for bullshit. Louis laughed, but inside she was cringing. Mia had been over to her house to study and to see her impressive library, which now included notes from the underground. And Louis had been proud of herself for not freaking out too much or trying to hide just how white her white family was or how white she was. It was weird. She felt so comfortable around Mia in terms of talking about books and ideas and not stupid high school shit, as Mia would say. But she couldn't seem to shake the feeling that one day Mia would decide she was actually too white to hang with and drop her. They had hung out at Mia's house a few times, and her parents were both warm and welcoming. None of Louis' insecurities were piqued. Louis sighed. "I'll look at it again," she said, "I guess." She watched as Janessa Keller sauntered down the hallway in her ripped jeans and tight red top that stopped just below her breasts to show off her even tighter tummy. Louis may have been able to write somewhat convincingly on strategies toward freedom and ethnic literature, but she would never, ever be the cute girl. It was ridiculous of her to even care about such things she knew, but some days it got to her. "Why are you eyeing that heifer?" Mia asked, closing the iPad. Louis' face flushed. Mia was so good at observing people and discerning their true motivations. It was quite a skill, but also unnerving when she turned her attentions to I think she's nice," Louis stammered. Mia groaned. "Janessa is a lot of things, but nice?" She shook her head. "That ain't one of them." "She calls me over to sit with her and her crew sometimes at lunch," Louis said defensively. "So she can ask you for help in Spanish next period," Mia snapped. "And notice your own use of the word sometimes. If someone wants to just be your friend sometimes, then that ain't too nice at all." Louis felt an anger brewing in the pit of her stomach, but she pushed it down. "She told me I should wear green eyeliner last week to highlight my eyes." Mia shook her head. "That's a terrible idea. What does she know about your eyes anyway?" Louis scooched a bit away from her friend. Mia's bluntness sometimes felt like barbs. She was trying to help me. Mia laughed. "Listen, Louis, girls like that don't help anyone, okay? Unless there's more helping in it for them than us." Leah's stomach fluttered. "Us?" she asked. Mia grinned. "Yeah, us, dummy. The black and proud nerds." She gathered her bag and books for next period. "The Oreos," she said softly. Louis felt her stomach relax and she laughed. Then her eyes widened. "But they don't call you that." Mia sighed. "You think you're the only one who's too white up in this joint? That only pretty little mixed girls get called Oreo?" "That's exactly what I thought," Louis said to herself. She studied Mia with her high cheekbones, deep mocha skin and braids that had recently been put in and flowed all the way down her back. In the short time they had been friends, Louis had really only considered what it was like to be her, Louis, consistently measuring herself up to Mia, who represented a kind of blackness she could never be. "See you after 7th period?" Mia asked. She stood up to walk to chemistry. Louis felt chagrined and nodded slowly. "See you then." "And I'll stop there." It goes on, but I'll stop there.
Like, no, don't stop. I'll just have to read the whole thing at some point. You're so good at young women. Like, you're just good at characters. I like all three of you because you're so good at characters. But goodness, just makes me miss friends that I've had since I was that age.
And being able to like walk in a crowded hallway. I was talking about this with my high school friends, right? Like actually like, touch your girlfriends, like actually be, and my girlfriends were like, I'm still friends with them. They're great friends. And they were like, well, but we never really, we were like the hugging type. I'm like, no, we would like run up to each other in the hallway and crash into each other.
Yes.
Because we wanted some physical contact. And then we would lock arms and pull each other down the hallway so that everybody had to move. Right? Like,
I think we had the same friends.
But you can't do that now, right?
No.
It's like it's so different right now because of COVID. And
yeah. Yep. Oh, anyway, well, thank you for sharing that because I'm really missing my Milwaukee crew and
aren't we all?
Yeah. Ugh. Okay. Well, now I would like to invite questions from our audience. I would like to invite questions of Wendy and Sarah and Shannon to each other. I'm gonna switch over to this gallery, at least for us. I'm never sure, even after 2 years of doing this, what the audience is seeing, even if I'm like, wait a minute, attendee views still says speaker. So there we are. Now, look at me learning on the fly. So
You know what? I have a question
Do it up.
for Sarah and Shannon. Sarah, you were saying that you were going to, you are setting your next book in the pandemic. I just turned in my 8th novel, and I had it's not set in the pandemic, but it's after the pandemic, and it talks about what the character went through. And my editors said, you know what, take that out. They didn't want me to talk about the pandemic at all. So I'm wondering if you've gotten any pushback at all from your editors, or Shannon, if you've even dealt with that at all. But I was so interested to hear that you're setting it there, because my editors were like, leave that
I
alone.
mean, that's kind of ridiculous. This is a big part of our lives. You know, it's the effect is just so everywhere. It's every aspect of life. So to ignore that and pretend that's not existing, that's crap. On the other hand, I haven't talked to my editor about it. My editor doesn't see my work until I hand it in. It's done. It's done. So I haven't even asked, you know, hey, is it okay if I set this in the pandemic in an ice shack?
You know what? I just read Louise Penny's latest novel, The Madness of Crowds, and there's a lot about the pandemic in there. So I'm reading and going, hey, I could have left that stuff in. I mean, you're right. We are all going through this stuff, and I had a few things to say about it.
Yeah, and you know, I'm wondering, you know, for the two of you, how the pandemic has affected your work, you know, in whatever ways, you know, whether it's the creative process or if it's your, you know, your ability to even write.
Yeah, I mean, I think like so it's interesting too, like I haven't had anybody tell me like, okay, you can't write about the pandemic, but I did have, you know, my friend and I are putting together a proposal for an anthology, like Gen X writes boomers. I don't know how to put it that, but sort of like a lot of us are dealing with our parents aging, and sort of essays on that. And my agent, who I adore, was like, we put something in there about, you know, pandemic stories, and she was like, people are exhausted about hearing about the pandemic. Like that's
what
not
my editors, that's exactly what they said. People are pandemic weary.
Yeah. Yep. And so, I mean, I get that. Like, if you're also talking, it depends on, like, you know, what is the writing for, right? Is it just for entertainment? Is it to help people process? Is it, you know, like a lot of literary fiction, you know, is supposed to be like this, you know, reflection of our real world right now, you know? I mean, so and I mean, we all know that there's going to be like, I mean, hundreds of novels written and taken place during the pandemic, you know, in like 10 years. I mean, there's going to be, you know, but now that there's something about being in it, I think that the publishing world is like a little bit, you know, scared of. It's interesting. I mean, I'm the weird one who at the beginning of the pandemic had to rewatch, what is it called? You know, the one, not Quarantine, what is it called?
Contagion.
Right. I had to rewatch that right at the beginning. And then I started reading, I read Station 11. I love that book. It was so good. And, you know, and so it's like, yeah, I mean, I think people deal with it in different ways. I'm not saying that like my agent or my editor were wrong. I think people are exhausted from it, but I think there's a lot more to the story. And it also, you know, to really get into like, okay, but what is this for, right? Like to really get into that, I think is important. I always say that I mean, I've never had writer's block a day in my life. My problem is that, and has always been, and really has only gotten more as I've gotten older and I have kids, and like I'm more sort of busy life, I guess, and just more things have happened to me, of course, as you live in the world. And my problem is like I never have enough time to work on all the things that I want to work on and tell the stories that I want to work on. And so that has continued throughout the pandemic. I also think that I often say now too, like, the world has continued to burn, and it's just, it's always been burning, but now it's it's just accelerated, and I'm on sabbatical this year. And one of my friends just, in August sold us her beautiful house, which is, in my community, and I love it. And my kids are doing great, so it's like, and I'm doing, I've got like, 4 or 5 projects I'm in the middle of, and I love working on. So like my life is great right now, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, but I feel like I have been able to pivot and just get into my work in different ways in the pandemic. And I know plenty of people who haven't, and I also feel like that's also makes complete sense,
Sarah, how's it affected you in terms of your work and your life? And
well, along with pandemic, there were other issues too, health issues with my son and things like that. And when I say writing about the pandemic, I'm writing a book where I never use the word pandemic. Really, it's just that we are living in this moment in history with all these extraneous things going on too. So there's politics, and there's the world on fire, as Shannon said, and all of these things going on that are, external, yet they have such a huge effect on all of us that, it's bound to affect your psyche. And, I'm stepping back going, oh, yeah. Writing, is that really important? One day. And then the next day it's like, yeah, of course it is, because when I'm picking up a book now, they are such an escape for me. And, I need to be doing that. I need to be creating that work. And I am to a degree. But, I do know other writers who, Peter Guy wrote a book like in the first 8 months of the pandemic. And I'm like, yeah. But no, it's been interesting. Just the challenges. And, where I am in my career, are these books what I want to be doing? Maybe I should branch out, things like that. You start questioning things.
It's funny you say that about your psyche, because I didn't think about it until just this moment when you said this. But, well, and people don't know, but I almost died from a paper cut. And Sarah, and I've repeated your line so much. It's like, you're a writer. You're probably the only one who can claim workers' comp from that. But so I got sepsis from a paper cut, and this was right before the pandemic. I was in the hospital when they locked it down. And then I had months of IV antibiotics, and then the pandemic. And I just became this crazy hermit that wouldn't go anywhere. And I thought it really didn't affect me, but now that I think about it, my new book that I just turned in, it's about an artist's descent into madness.
That might have some correlation.
Yeah, it might. It just might. So yeah, it really
yeah.
Yes.
Well, and we're at different stages in our writing careers and our lives too. And Shannon, you have young kids. So I can't even imagine what that's been like. Has that had an effect on you? The fact that you've had to be, I don't know the ages of your kids, but I'm assuming that they've been home a bit.
Yeah, so my son will be 12 soon, my daughter's 7, and we actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, went to live with my parents in Ann Arbor, Michigan, because I'm basically a single mom, and I was teaching full-time at Minneapolis College. I teach about 5 classes, mostly composition, all writing classes, very intensive in terms of grading and other things. So I knew that there was no way that I was going to be able to do that, and then also try to like lead them through virtual learning. And then I was also freaking out because of the beginning of the pandemic and nobody knew what the hell was going on. And I've got these, I mean, healthy, but elderly parents. And so but that ended up being like a really good thing. But yeah, I mean, and then everything sort of like moved to Zoom, part of my writerly life. I'm a weird writer in many ways. I mean, all of us are weird, but I'm weird in that I'm an extrovert. So I actually enjoy doing things like this and talking to people and, being in large groups and all this stuff. And, all that got shut down. So everything moved to Zoom. And so my kids, they've always been like dragged with me to this event and that event and like whatever. And now it's like they're like Zoom personalities. I mean, I think you saw my son, he was sort of hovering around here for a while. I knew it was something like Fortnite Switch related, right? And so I like pushed him off early during that reading. And then he came back and was like, "Can I buy this?" And I'm like, "Nah, you can't, okay." But I had another, what was it? I'm the Loft, the fiction mentor for the Loft mentorship program this year. And so, my son came over and he wanted to, we had a session this weekend and, so he had to talk about, who his favorite writers were, and why, and so he made an appearance on that, and so it's been much more sort of like that type of thing. Whereas before the pandemic, it's like they wouldn't be all up in people's faces, yeah. And it's always, I think, when you have children and you're a woman, a femme identified person, it's like, I mean, I just laugh. Like I saw this one guy's tweet on Twitter this summer and he was like, it was something like, yes, if you're a serious writer, then, you just need to find a way to prioritize your writing every day. You have to get up early, sit down and write for 3 hours, like blah, blah, blah. I laughed so hard. This other woman was like, she responded and she was just like, this is a man that clearly is not the main caretaker for any children or like doesn't have children. They're obviously partnered, with a female bodied person, female gendered person who like takes care of all their needs, like all that. I mean, and that's just what it is. People will ask me sometimes like, oh, this one essay in A Good Time for the Truth, Fear of a Black Mother, which is probably the thing that at least in Minnesota people have read of mine the most. And so they're like, well, when did you write that? What were the circumstances? How did you? I'm like, you want me to tell you how I wrote it? I was like, my daughter was 6 months. So she's like nursing. My son is like 4.5. He's literally running circles around the table. And I'm like handpicking. It's like the only thing I've written, thank God, that came out done, that didn't have multiple drafts and I was on deadline, like whatever. And I'm not advocating that way of getting work done, but I know so many women, most of the women that I know who are writers are women of color. So it's like, but white women too, is just like, I get the shit done any way I can. It's not always pretty. It's not always, whatever, but so that just continued and took different forms in the pandemic.
Oh yeah, well, process I think has changed for a lot of people, but yeah, and I was writing books when my son was small, and Wendy, I think you were too, weren't you?
Yeah.
I think we get very creative. I mean, I could write standing up while doing something else. And in fact, I think I do a lot of writing when I'm not sitting at a computer. when I'm doing mindless things, you know, you're gardening or you're swimming or, you know, you're out for a walk, whatever. As long as you can find the quiet time outside the house, that to me is writing time.
I
Going
get
for
my
a
best
drive.
ideas that way. You know, I'll write myself into a corner and then take the dog for a walk, and I'll have like some song going through my head, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's the way to go now. So I have to get away from it.
Yeah. I want to ask, do you guys, I really miss going to libraries. I did my first, you know, things looked like they were getting better. So I did a couple events with the launch of Reeling, and I went to some bookstores, and that felt so good to be out, even though, you know, like 3 or 4 people showed up, you know, they got my attention. And that felt so good, and it felt like we were on the cusp of maybe some normalcy, and then everything backslid again. But I have to say, I so miss going to libraries. You know,
I
I
do
do
too.
a lot of Zoom, and I do Zoom with another friend. I'm doing one on Thursday with Jess Lowry, and
Oh,
we get together in the same room. We're also writing. We also write together.
oh wow.
We don't look at each other's stuff. We just get in the same room at the Barbie writer's condo over at her place. And she's got different writing stations, and we write. And then so when we do Zoom stuff, we do like 2 writers at the bar, at the Barbie bar in her condo. And that makes a huge difference, just being in the same room with someone. But I really miss readers. Do you guys?
Yeah, I do too.
I will say, as the person that has my fingers in a lot of library events, that libraries want things to be in them. Like, we're working in this direction in spite of everything that's happening right now in St. Paul anyway. I did an event with Carolyn Holbrook in the middle of December, and that was great. It was, of course, before everything got nutty, but yeah, so we're in St. Paul anyway. We're definitely, we'll bring you back. We'll get there.
Yeah, we're
We'll get
trying.
there.
I mean, we're trying. Lorna Landvik and I have a legacy tour that keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and we just want to go meet our people.
It's wonderful to connect with community, you know, I mean, and this is better than nothing. You know, like, I'm very glad for the technology that we do have, but at the same time, it's just, there's nothing like in person. It's just, there isn't, you know. And then those of us who, you know, did grow up in libraries, you know, I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and so I remember going to, I mean, yeah, the Ann Arbor Public Library was awesome, but I remember in high school, you know, going into the graduate library, and, you know, it felt like I was descending into these catacombs, and like this, just the actual smell of the books,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like the old dusty books, right? And I just felt so at home, you know, just curling up with a book in one of the stacks, you know, and you know, like, I live right near Moon Palace Books, and my dear friends run Moon Palace, and that's really this, you know, community touchstone, and so much happens there. There's so many events, and you run into people, you know, that you haven't seen, and all these things, right? And yeah, I mean, so writing is a solitary act, but all good writing comes out of community, you know, and so, you know, all good stories come out of community. And so you want that feedback loop, you know. It will I mean, I don't want to jinx anything, so I'll say this, but I do feel like Omicron is going to peak soon, you know, and it's not like things are going to go back to normal or the way that they were, because I don't believe that. But I think it's going to be different soon. I do believe.
Yeah, I hope so. And I miss going out and seeing other writers. You know,
Yeah, me too.
I want to go to a bookstore.
I've done a few. It's been wonderful to have that. I mean, these are great because they do have longevity, and we can, you know, say, look at Minnesota's wonderful writers, and I can revisit this conversation, you know. But that there's something about the event that just sort of disappears into the ether afterwards, and you just sort of carry it with you in a different way than the person who is sitting next to you carries it. And that's what I miss.
Yeah. You know,
there's somebody here
sorry.
too. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Chris says, as someone who doesn't live in the metro area, I've loved how many author events I've been able to attend virtually the last few months. That's something I also hear a lot, and people who are differently abled and whatnot, just the accessibility piece. I don't think that events and gatherings are ever going to go back to being just in person anymore. I mean, I do think that there's going to be a Zoom and a virtual component, and I do feel like you know, that that aspect is awesome. I know I've attended a few things that there's no way, you know, I could have seen. So yeah, sorry, Sarah, you were going to say something.
Well, just the idea that we can do these hybrid events now, reach that many more people. And there's been some days, you know, around the launch of Reeling where I was able to do 2 or 3 events a day.
Yeah.
Because it was on Zoom. But I would love to be able to go out somewhere and then have my, you know, I do a lot of book clubs, a lot of elderly people. They're not going to want to come out. They should have the option. And I hope the libraries, and I'm assuming that they are, Wendy, that the libraries are making this adaptation too. And I think it's one of the good things that have come of this. I really do.
Yeah, I think the accessibility piece is great, especially, you know, considering the number of times that I heard from assisted living facilities also just saying, can we play this event as a community program? And I'm like, yeah, please. Like that's fantastic.
Yeah. Or that, you know, like tonight, there's 2 other events that I'd really like to have seen. And if they're archived, I'm going to be able to see them, and they're going to be able to see this if they want to.
Well, I love this. I would love, you know, I would also, dear audience, if you have questions before we sort of, I know that everyone has kind of a approximately 1 hour, you know, tolerance for screen spaces, but I do want to make sure that if any audience members have questions for our writers, that they have a chance.
Most comments more than questions is what I'm.
Yeah.
I'm glad there's engagement.
Of the feedback. And also just to reach out, I don't know, but I guess I shouldn't speak for you guys, but I love it when readers just reach right out to me too. I'm easy to get a hold of. You can get me through my website. I'm sure the same goes for you guys too, but you know, if you have a question, shoot it to me.
Yeah, I love that too. I love hearing from readers.
That's delightful.
And yeah, it doesn't have to be a question. It can also be a comment or something, or as my daughter says, it could be a quament, which is a comment and a question. Yes. Yep.
Somebody did actually just post a question. Have any of you been interested in writing your memoirs?
Memoir.
I wrote 1 memoir, and I'll never write another one. Called Shelter, Off the Grid in the Mostly Magnetic North, about I thought it would be a good idea to buy 40 acres of raw wilderness and build a cabin with my 12-year-old. Yeah.
Didn't they make that one called Mosquito Coast? Yeah, somebody.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, writers' lives, they're not that interesting, are they?
It depends on the writer. Yeah, it doesn't. It's an interesting question. My new book was originally my editor and I were calling it a novel. Now it's shifted into memoir, but that just sort of shows you its hybridity and its resistance to any one genre. It's called a speculative memoir, botched. It's called, and so. Yeah, and so that's probably, I write a lot of essays and things about you know, it's not really about my family, but I kind of use that as a way to talk about some deeper issues like race and racism, you know, the carceral state, and you know, other things. So I have a lot of short pieces like that. But yeah, Botched, it's probably the weirdest thing I've ever written. And I really don't know if people are if they're really going to think about it as a memoir. I sort of, when I was 19, I found my birth mother, and she told me that my name at birth was Erin Powers. And so there's one timeline in that book that is Erin Powers growing up in 1985 with my birth mother. And then the other primary timeline is quote unquote Shannon Gibney growing up in 1985 with my white adoptive family. And then there is this wormhole that connects all the timelines. And then I've got pictures, photographs in there. I've got birth certificates, death certificates, all kinds of things. So it's very odd. But it was the only way that I felt like I could really tell that particular story.
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I've never written a memoir because, as Sarah said, I'm just not that interesting. But the book that came out before Keepers was called The Haunting of Bryn Wilder, and I wrote that. I had a deadline, but I was going through a really hard time in my life. I had broken up with a 20-year relationship, and I was living on my own for the first time in a long time. My dog died, and my mom died, and so I didn't. And it's like you got to take the dog to all this stuff, and then the dog has to die. And it was a terrible time, but I had a deadline, and I didn't feel very creative, and so I just started writing down stuff that had really happened. So people who know me, who read The Haunting of Bryn Wilder, go, yeah, that's all about you, right? And it is. So that's my little fictionalized version of my memoir.
Well, they say there's no true fiction. You know, we're always writing ourselves into whatever it is. Maybe not us, but us, you know.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking that one. I always enjoy thinking about the ways genres bleed into each other, and
Yeah.
how I feel like it's becoming much more, I don't want to say acceptable, but it's at least it's a little more common, and that fluidity is fascinating to me.
There's a good show on TV. This is not about writing, but Shannon, I wonder if you've seen it. It's called Ordinary Joe. And it's 3 different timelines of one guy's life. If he had just made a different choice here, a different choice there, and a different choice there. And that's interesting. It sounds kind of like well, what if this would have happened, and what if that would have happened? And
Like
that stuff.
doors. Sliding Door was like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah,
Reality.
I haven't watched Ordinary Joe, but yeah, it's on my list. It's like I consider myself like a mid-career writer, and so I have now that I have a few books behind me, I can sort of see some patterns. And so one of the big patterns is this theme of rupture. People who there's some huge event which created a before and after. And so adoptees have that. Talking to a dear friend of mine who lived the first 11 years of her life in India. Many immigrants have that, and she said that it wasn't until the past 5 years that she really let go of an idea that there was another Shalini Gupta living out her life in India.
Oh, wow.
And so, I think that that's a kind of latent obsession, for me. is these sort of like ruptures, and then what happens to the sense of self and what happens to the stories, both internally, externally, and also in terms of like the individual stories, but also the family stories, when that's the case.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna just be thinking about that now. Because, you know, everybody, well, I'm not saying everybody, but most people have something, a rupture. And yeah, I'm gonna be thinking a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, and there's also, I mean, any family that exists, you can go back in time to any one particular event, and you're going to get 6 different stories, totally different takes on the same damn thing. And those perspectives, that's what fascinates me when you get a whole bunch of characters together and you know, their own version of the reality or the story. That's one of the joys of writing, you know, for me.
Absolutely. Well, I think about, you know, my own life, and, you know, my brother and I, a lot of our family is gone now.
Yeah.
We're kind of the 2 left standing. And oh
Who's this?
no, hi.
Hi.
Say hi.
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 Welcome. We've
You
reached this
say,
point
can
in
you tell
the
everybody who
evening.
you are?
Maui.
This is Maui.
Yeah.
Maui wants Mama to come downstairs, so I think we're gonna go.
Yeah,
But,
I think we Sarah had a lovely moment of wrapping it there, so we can say hello and good night,
Yeah.
and
Thank you all for being here.
yes,
Yeah, for taking
thank
the
you, dear
time.
audience.
This
Thank
was
you.
fun. Let's do it again.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Shannon and Wendy and Sarah, and of course to the Lake Agassiz Regional Library for their partnership, and of course more Minnesota writers speaking on their work and writing coming up from the Friends. The Fireside Reading Series starts next Wednesday. It will be on Zoom, but we'll have a good time anyway. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks.
Stay warm, stay
Yep.
safe.
Have a good night.
Bye.